For one thing, there was a curfew imposed on us, and one of the things, if you're a high school student and you're involved in athletics and stuff like that, you know, I remember running home from a say, basketball game or something in order to get inside before the curfew, so as not to be caught in the street after the curfew went into effect for us. Immediate effect, the order indicated, among other things, that you were to be prepared to be taken someplace, and all you were allowed to bring with you was what you can carry. Which, when people ask me about, since ask me about the experience, I often say something like, well, imagine that what would happen if you were all of a sudden told by the authorities that you're going to be moved someplace, and all you can do is, all you can carry is what you can carry. That means that everything you have literally is gone, and only what you really need as personal effects is all you can take. It has an unreal impact. I'm sure it would have an unreal impact on anybody, and that's one of the things that stick in my memory about the immediate impact of the order. Of course, you know, the newspapers talk about it. In those days, we didn't have television, and the executive order was put up on telephone poles and billboards around the city. So you know that it would hit you in the face every so often. You couldn't get away from it. That is in the days leading up to when they picked us all up and took us to the temporary assembly center, which they called. In our case, we were taken to the Tanforan racetrack, which was immediately south of San Francisco, and they used that racetrack and the stables and the barracks built in the infield of the racetrack to house us. Because my mother worked for a doctor, and the doctor was ordered to Tule Lake, which is one of the internment camps, or so-called relocation centers, which I think is a euphemism for what now is called a concentration camp. In any event, the impact of Tule Lake was something that I definitely remember, because it was located in a barren part of the state, up there near the Oregon border. I don't remember when we first arrived there. I think it was winter, and you know, people in San Francisco are not used to snow, but there was plenty of snow in Tule Lake, and the impact of seeing the barracks, which is hard to describe. Unless you see a picture of it, but they're tar paper covered wooden structures, which were made to house families, but very small quarters, very unprivate. That's not a word, but there's very little privacy. The whole impact of the physical nature of the place, of course, is one thing I remember. What, you know, we're going to live here, you know, and I was the family at that time consisted of my mother and I only. So my father not being here, he was in Japan. And so it turns out that I was more or less, I guess, the man of the family, if you will. You know, my mother was very independent, so the two of us went through that internment period together, my mother and I. I had a couple of sisters, but they were in Japan, and I hardly ever knew them. As well as my father, who I didn't see very much because he had this the profession of going back and forth between Japan. And after the war started, he was stuck over there. He never did get over here. So it was more or less pretty much my mother and I. I think in the early or late 70s, I should probably start by saying that I served 2 terms way back as a national president of the Japanese American Citizens League. And in that capacity, I got closer to the movement that led to the enactment of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which was the so-called redress bill. Like many Japanese Americans, I was very pessimistic about the possibility that we would ever attain such a piece of legislation. And fortunately, because of a handful of people, several who were my friends, had the foresight or projected an ideal that perhaps redress couldn't be obtained, namely some kind of acknowledgement that the internment was wrong, and some kind of a redress in some shape would be good. But it was everybody felt it was an uphill climb, and something that was an ideal, but one that very few people had any optimism that it would occur, except for a few people, as I mentioned, who had the vision to push for it, and ultimately persuaded the JACL, Japanese American Citizens League, as a national organization to lobby for it. And they created this Legislative Education Committee, whose mandate was to lobby for passage of the act. And over a period of at least a decade, attempts were made in the Congress to get that legislation through. After repeated setbacks, they finally did get out of the committee. And we have a lot of things. I think people ask me, why did I think internment was successful? I think there's several reasons. I think one of the main reasons was the fact that the Japanese American soldiers, servicemen in World War II, made a record that impressed a lot of people, starting with President Reagan, whose support of the redress bill, I think, was basically rooted in his admiration for the acts of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Japanese Americans in the 100th Battalion. I think they're and the military intelligence folks in the Eastern Theater. I think those things all had a heavy impact on the president's support of the redress bill. As I mentioned, I think it was an uphill climb with a lot of odds against it. But I think another reason why it succeeded was because it was a bipartisan thing. I mean, it was not. It was pushed, and the leadership in the movement came from Japanese American legislators like the late Congressman Bob Matsui, who was a personal friend of mine, and the other Congressman Mineta, Norman Mineta from San Jose, and Senator Inoue, who came back from Italy with only one arm. He was 442nd veteran. Those legislators, he and Senator Matsunaga from Hawaii also, they were instrumental in persuading their colleagues in both the House and the Senate to support that particular bill until it was ultimately signed by President Reagan in 1987. In that process, I was asked to succeed another Nisei, another Japanese American who had chaired the committee. He passed away, and I was asked to become the chair of the Legislative Education Committee, which I served for in that capacity until after the redress bill was signed, and the apology plus the token redress amount, I think, of $20,000 that was granted to every internee who was alive at the time that President Reagan signed the bill. And so that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of my involvement with the redress movement. Today, when you find a lot of stuff going on that reminds us of what happened to us then, namely some of the problems facing Iranians, Iraqis, and Muslims and folks today who, I think are on the thin edge of being victims of a similar kind of thing that happened to us. Although I think the difference now is that there are enough thinking Americans who would not let that happen. And I think Some of us, JACL, for example, have spoken up in this and in support of the Muslims and the folks that are targeted because of what's going on today in Iraq and in the problem, the worldwide problem of terrorism. The greatest challenge I had to face. Well, I think I may have managed to grow up a little bit faster than I might ordinarily have, because I was, my mother and I were the only, at the time was the only family we had. And so the responsibility of us going through all of that, which when I think back on it, I wonder how anybody, not just us, but anybody survives an experience like that. It's not, most people would, that ask me about that, and I tell them, even today, an occasional person would not believe that happened to us. And I think that's the attempt to live normally and keep focused on, well, I guess surviving the experience. And one of the things that is very bad about that kind of experience is the unknown. Most people, I think, have problems with the unknown. Most of us are comfortable with knowing what the future holds and all that. Well, we were in a situation where we didn't know what the future holds, or whether there was even a future. So I guess those are all challenges of sorts. Have you ever heard of the word enryo?
No.
It means a character trait that involves being reluctant to talk about yourself, reluctant to, I think I used the term earlier, self-effacing. I think the Japanese have a reputation for that, especially the first generation and second generation. I think the third generation don't have that problem, because they become, I guess some people might say, Americanized in a positive sense, not negative, that you have more self-confidence, more, but we came from a generation that really lacked self-confidence, mainly because of the way we were treated. The internment being only the big part of the thing, but if you always feel that you're different, and all the cartoon caricatures make you look either comical, stupid, or dangerous, or sneaky, which is all the things I remember are being described as, it's hard to develop any self-confidence, so.